Hello, hello, hello. Greetings, AnCap Radio. This is your host, Adam Carswell, the voice of liberty, and we have a special treat in store for you here today. I want to highlight someone named Jonny Dupre, also known as J.D. Garrett. I first got connected with him, man, a while back now that I think about it, at least 2018, 2019, by way of a very famous name here on AnCap Radio, Jeff Berwick. So JD was someone I always wanted to work with, strive to work with from a personal development perspective, and then finally had the opportunity to do so, and I've been working with him for almost the past 5 years now. So I highly endorse this individual, and one of the best pieces of content I ever witnessed him put out is this live recording that he did at a conference in Austin, Texas. And so that's what we want to do here today. He's AnCap to the core, as far as someone who is very in touch with just connecting with people, his surroundings, understanding how science and the mind, and what I would consider real science, right? Not none of this BS stuff that we've been told is science lately, but neuroscience, psychology, how the mind works. So many incredible things that this guy knows, and I've seen him impact literally the lives of many. He even does he has a program, I believe, with Jeff Berwick called Game Changers. So I'm sure if you type in Dollar Vigilante Game Changers, or even to our team, if you guys could look up when you have a moment, the Dollar Vigilante Game Changers. I think they have a link to it somewhere. But again, that's something I believe that comes from the mind of JD, Jonny Dupre. So the most important thing is if you guys are interested after listening to this interview to reach out to Jonny and to work with him, we're going to have a link to his website down below as well. But just can't endorse the man enough. So this interview was recorded live, and it's from a podcast called How Do You Health? And Baldo, who's the host of the show, is actually a good friend of mine as well. So anyways, you can check out their podcast, How Do You Health, for more information on them and what they're up to. But they're a really cool company focused on mental and physical well-being out of Austin, Texas. So without further ado to our team, if you guys could play the live interview with JD, we'll take it from there. Thank you for tuning into AnCap Radio. Hit the like button, the subscribe button, and let's get into it.
And there's social. And social is any heart-centered bond.
Okay.
It's connection, really.
Okay.
So family, friends, romance, partners, all of it.
Right.
That's all I would consider social.
Okay.
Yeah. Getting a feel for somebody when you talk to them by paying attention to the way they relate to these 7 bodies allows you to get to know somebody really quickly.
That makes sense.
That maps across in me unconsciously as what's called a synesthesia.
Okay.
Which is my unconscious mind is picking up all of this information, which is about, according to neuroscience, about 400 billion bits of information per second.
It's like a sixth sense, right?
And it appears as a sixth sense. And the sixth sense for me is actually awareness.
Conscious awareness.
It's an awareness. It doesn't have to necessarily be conscious. It can be an unconscious, but it's an awareness that.
Because now you just feel it before you even think about what that could mean.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this awareness is it's sort of a sixth sense. Intuition is nothing more than an awareness of the other bodies all put into one.
Yep, that makes
sense.
That makes sense.
Well, my synesthesia means that my unconscious mind can pick up information about the person I'm looking at, talking to, connecting with on a deep level, and it turns it into another one of my senses.
Yes.
So if I'm picking up visual cues off of you, I might pick up a smell.
Interesting.
Or it might present itself as a smell.
It might present itself to me as a smell.
Yeah.
So I'll say things like, "You smell scared."
It's like pheromones, right?
It's
pheromones.
But that's how the synesthesia appears in me.
That makes sense.
Is as a smell.
That makes sense. So you know what's funny about that? I can do that with vibration. So because I believe energy is vibration. So I believe it's a frequency. So if we're all antennas, this conversation that we're having right now is on a radio station right now that's vibing with all of us.
That's right.
And so what happened is it's like, hey, we can pull in this guy real quick. He's on a different station. Yeah. Hey, you're listening to classical. Come over here and listen to jazz real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, I like jazz. Cool. What are y'all talking about?
And then he can add his classical vibe into the jazz.
That's right. And then we made some beautiful music.
Yeah. So yesterday when we were talking, I turned my head away and I wasn't even looking at you. And I could hear not words, but and I was like, God, is that me? And I checked in with myself, and I'm like, that's not me. And then I looked over, and you were like this, staring off into space. And I went, it's not me. It's Baldo.
Yeah.
and I went, I can hear you in my head.
Yeah, and then I said, well, that's interesting because, like, I know what you mean, but I can't tell you what I was thinking.
No.
And then you said...
talking at 1,000,000 miles a minute.
You referenced it to, it was something to do with before I could even speak, so there's no words I could put to it.
That's right. It's a trance.
It came out to like because
it comes out pre-verbal, which for me is a set of tones.
Yes.
If you look at a child who's 1.5 years old that doesn't know how to speak yet, they're still communicating. They just aren't.
We just can't understand them.
That's right. They haven't developed their language center enough yet. They haven't developed their executive order higher functioning. Their prefrontal cortex and their medial, it hasn't been developed yet.
Yeah.
And so they are receiving energy, to use your term. They are receiving energy and signal from the people around them. They just haven't learned how to process it and then communicate it back the same way everybody else is around them yet.
Yeah.
So when I'm listening to somebody in a trance, all I hear is their tone of voice, their tones of voice, the speed and tempo at which they're talking to themselves, and that gives me information.
And it's like looking into their psyche. It's looking at subconscious, the way that they hold. Because I look at holding patterns.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I'm very bad about is posture, right? And the way that you carry yourself just by your chest. Imagine from a primal instinct, that's what bigger animals do to basically allow themselves to establish dominance, right?
Yeah. Territorial
right.
presence.
So then what I look at is this, like in the sales world, some of the old jokes are like, the person who talks first is the one who loses. So imagine if you were to just communicate just solely through eyes, what you could be able to communicate to another person as far as understanding. Then it goes down to their posture. You can almost pick up energy when it comes in the room because you're like, man, I don't know, this change of energy just came over.
I wouldn't say it's almost. I would say
you
absolutely
can. Because the other thing is you
up.
have magnetism that's literally coming in because of that. Because all of us are basically this battery that's walking around with all this charged energy, right?
Oh yeah, dude, I'm an energizer bunny.
So think about this from the science standpoint, the mitochondria, right? Not to get too scientific, but it's the powerhouse of energy.
Yep.
It's a battery. We all have these little millions of batteries in our body, and what you're getting is something to recharge it.
Yep.
So if you recharge your battery on the deepest level possible, you walk around like fully charged, like I can function better.
But you're recharging it on the physical.
On the physical, yes.
What about recharging the mental body and the emotional body and the sexual body and the spiritual body? Each one of them can be recharged.
So I imagine from the mental body, here's what, and it's one of the things that I was even going to talk about today from a longevity standpoint. The mental wellness is you always want to address that. If you walk around and you talk to a person who might be like depressed, I don't like to really use that word, but let's say depressed or anxious.
Why don't you like using that word?
Because it's a label.
Yeah, but we need labels in order to communicate. We can't talk. We can't share our subjective reality with another person without having a label, a word, a representation of that experience.
So go back to the energy aspect. All right. So a guy comes in.
Yeah.
I watched, and because I'm very much in you. The sense is not necessarily the 7 categories you talk about. It's more of like I can just sense his vibrational energy when he walks in a room.
Yep.
And I could tell that something's off. There's dysfunction. There's dis-ease somewhere.
Misalignment.
I love that. You said that. Realignment the other day. It's like that's a misalignment of something, right? It's a chi, whatever. Like you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So then I know what's going on. How can I help you? The person wants to open up, but they're reluctant to. And if I label them and say, I know what's going on with you, buddy, you're depressed. It's almost like asking someone, why do you do this? They recluse back into when they were younger and they hear the why and they become defensive. It's the same
regression.
And a regression. So you go back into the id and you go back to the psyche and subconscious. Say, look, man, all I'm trying to tell you is you look like you're down, right? Is there something going on with you? Because you can talk about it here. Most people think it's a broken sense, like I am broken. And I imagine say, no, what if you just run on low serotonin production?
Or you've just mastered sadness.
You mastered sadness.
Well, because it could be addicting, right? It's still a chemical release.
It's just training. I mean, not to take away from what you guys, not to take away from what you guys know, but if you practice something long enough, it becomes habit.
Well, that's the neuroplasticity aspect. So that's what I was getting at. So think about this. Negative thoughts can literally, from a chemical standpoint, produce inflammatory cells in the body that attack you.
Yes.
The same way an infection would.
The same way a negative thought pattern
The same
can.
and negative thought pattern. So imagine this. If mental wellness is so important, you literally can call yourself to be sick or healthy just on your own thoughts in your head. Like just what you think every day.
Psychoneuroimmunology.
Yes.
Psychoneuroimmunology.
We just is that a thing?
No, that's a
real thing. That's a real thing.
Psychoneuroimmunology. How your mindset affects through your neurology, your
makes
immune
sense.
system.
It makes sense.
It's that water test, right? Or like the what's it called? The snowflake test.
Yep.
Where do you guys know about this? Right?
Yeah. Emoto,
right? And you speak to the fucking thing while it's dropping and see how it crystallizes when it freezes.
Man, imagine how you talk to yourself.
Sure, and we're mostly water.
Well, think about this. If we're mostly water, the other day I was looking at this video. Science has discovered that water has memory, like DNA memory. Like you can make literally a vaccine from a water droplet that took a picture of a viral infection. That's gene therapy now. On top of that, a water droplet has vibrational energy.
Sure.
So imagine if you put a vibrating plate and you put a water droplet on top of it, it would vibrate and there would be a pattern, a geometric pattern. So you think about this.
Are you trying to tell me there's some order to this whole
There's
universe?
some order to this thing. It's not just the idea that you just call it just random energy. It's there's a physical component to it, but the mental aspect is this. When they say your gut's your second brain, your serotonin comes from your gut.
Yeah.
So if you eat like crap and you don't produce any serotonin, you're walking around with an inflamed digestive tract and you have negative thoughts on top of it, you'll produce inflammatory serotonin when you finally do. And what happens is you can't get better no matter how many pills, IVs, therapies you get, because when you go back home, the holding pattern goes back to the same neuroplasticity when you go back home to say, I'm not worth it. I'm an imposter. I'm a fake. I'm not good enough.
These BS beliefs.
These BS beliefs.
So can you get into the three? Yesterday you talked about worth.
Oh, the three things I don't believe in.
Yes,
the three bullshits. Okay, so number one, I'm just going to go through these really quickly. Number one, blame. Okay, when you actually blame another human being, it does two things. One, it separates responsibility and ownership of choice from you and from them in the moment. And everybody has their role to play, and everybody played their role and their part in it. So as soon as you blame, it's the negative utilization of your ability to place a judgment on something to try and separate you from whatever actually occurred. It happened. It happened the way it happened. You reacted the way you reacted. They reacted the way they reacted. But your blame after the fact is to try and let yourself off the hook from what already occurred. It's a complete waste of psychological energy. Okay, and it separates you from power.
Yeah.
Okay, so blame for me is a complete waste.
Yeah,
complete waste of time. Okay, second, deserving. This concept of deserving. She didn't deserve that. He did deserve this. And the concept I often say to people is, did the 7-year-old deserve leukemia? Did that puppy deserve to be born into a dogfighting ring? Okay, did the man and the woman who just got married deserve to get in a car accident the next day and the man die? Did she deserve that? Deserving has nothing to do with what actually does happen or doesn't happen. So for me, it's a complete negative, once again, a negative utilization of our ability to place judgment on something. So instead, let's get beyond deserving. Let's just deal with life as it is. Okay. Deal with the truth of something. And the third concept I just cannot understand why humanity destroys itself with this is worth, self-worth. In what context were you good enough? And if I had taken you out of that context and put you in this context, what would your worth be?
Yep, I agree. Whatever you decide it is.
That's right.
Because literally, I love this quote. There was a guy that said, when you were younger, you thought everyone was looking at you. When you got older, you realized no one was looking at you. No one cared.
No one cared.
No one cared at all. Right?
They're too busy caring about themselves, thinking you're caring about them.
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay, and I'll give you an example. This is one of my favorite things recently. I believe in this. I'm not sure about this. I think that the first NFT piece of artwork was bought for $70 million. I think the first NFT
artwork.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I wouldn't buy it for $70. But to somebody else, that painting, that art was worth $70 million. And so the worth of that thing was decided by that individual. And this takes us to the quote, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So worth changes according to perspective. Well, if your worth changes according to perspective and you have no self-worth, who are you rating that based on? Whose perspective are you rating that worth based on? Likely mom.
Yeah.
Likely dad.
Yep.
Likely the society, the religion, the culture you grew up in.
That you were told.
Stop giving them worth and watch how much their worth matters to you.
That's right.
So stop making their perspective worth anything to you, and vice versa will immediately and instantly occur. So that for me, worth is a BS concept. Deserving is a BS concept, and blame is a BS concept. Ownership and responsibility for one's own power and choice in the moment as you take actions, positive or negative.
Right. And you leave it at that, and it removes the traumatic response and connection to it, because we should respond, not react. If we respond, essentially, we say, okay, I can make a level-headed decision without emotions attached, right? Unfortunately, traumatic events have allowed us to have this emotional attachment that can be viewed as positive or negative, right?
Yeah.
I think crying
and positive and negative is, once again, according to the judgments you're passing.
That's right. So, because you can say, hey, guys aren't supposed to cry. That's a sign of weakness. I'm saying to who? To me, if anything, it's the biggest release possible. Like, I need to get this out of my system. I feel so good when I finally do cry.
And can I take a giant step behind that?
Yeah.
I think it's contextual. You cannot determine whether a cry is good or bad unless you have the context and the intention and the present state established.
Correct. Well said.
Because I know people who cry and they don't get what they want out of the moment.
That's right.
Because of their crying. So maybe it isn't a cleanse for them.
It's right. Just like the journeys on the weekend. I hate to say it, but it's like, how are you implementing the change?
You have to determine what is your desire for you to determine whether or not something is good or bad.
That's right. And I look at it as saying, if I'm ready to face everything and deserve the constructive criticism coming, I can grow, because I can learn from what all this really meant. And because life is full of experiences and not failures, I can look at it and say, hey, I can leave that time back then, and I was that person. I'm not that same person anymore. I evolved. I adapted.
Which is all a perspective.
It's all a perspective, because who's judging who? Who cares what it says?
There's the word thing.
If you go back to the Ten Commandments, come on, that was like the original way, but we used to think 50 years ago of judgment. Nowadays, no one really looks at that anymore, right? And you say, well...
And when you're saying this to me about the Ten Commandments, my brain jumped to Egypt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way before the Ten Commandments existed.
Yeah.
Like the pharaohs and it's like back then when all of that came as a part of that story. What came before that? So what were the Ten Commandments, or the judgment schematic, the schema, the blueprint for judging based on society?
Ultimate judgment.
So I think all of it's fluid.
It's a commandment. It's not an agreement, right? Which is interesting.
So
because
where does intentionality play?
It only has value to the extent you give it value. It's the same dang thing again. If I don't believe, I can't believe I'm about to go here. This is going to be raw.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm about to go here.
Go.
If I don't believe Jesus Christ is God or the Son of God, nothing in the Bible makes a shit bit of difference.
I understand that.
Nothing. I have to believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God or directly connected to God for anything else in the Bible or anything else in Christian doctrine to mean anything. Otherwise, it's just a story. It's just another story. So I have to buy into that. Let's call it a core belief, a root assumption. And the root assumption is Jesus Christ was God or was the Son of God. If I buy into that, all of the other derivatives come off of that. Okay? If you don't believe God exists, religion kind of loses hold on you. All of the doctrines of all world religions kind of lose hold on you. Same thing with science, though. Science, for me, is there's some root assumptions of science, or core root assumptions in science. And if you believe in those, then all of the scientific method, research method, and all the other doctrines of science make sense.
It does.
So you still have to, at some base level, buy into or adopt or own or have some intentionality around saying, this is what I choose to believe.
Yep. I agree with that. Stand for something.
Otherwise, it's all fluid. And that's the beauty of consciousness. It's completely fluid. And then if we map that across to what we know of neuroscience, now we have neuroplasticity.
Yep.
It's all completely fluid.
It is.
You could change your brain.
Energy is movement. Energy is movement. You can always change. To remain stagnant is death.
I disagree.
Why?
The Wright brothers had an absolute rock solid belief that manned flight was possible. And everybody tried to convince them they were crazy. They were nuts. And they held rigidly to their belief in that. Nope. I believe it exists. I'm going to do it. How many inventors, innovators, thought-provoking conversationalists have stuck to rigidly their belief system in the face of challenge until everybody went, oh, crap. They were right.
Goodyear. That's a prime example.
Like, oh, crap, they were right. And then all of a sudden, they're a revolutionary.
Goodyear.
Yes.
I can't tell you, Goodyear, who basically discovered rubber, spent like 13 years or something failing every single day, quit his job, his family was like,
was it failure?
And that's the thing, right? And he did it and revolutionized what? Like people, like that, me think about it, because now you could drive places.
What's this made out of? Sorry.
Yeah, you could drive places, right? And it was the stubbornness, I love that. I do agree with that.
So I think that if we're going to be true philosophers, but maybe we should call ourselves philosophists. Because a philosopher just has a philosophers, I think, sit around and just think, but a philosophist takes thinking and applies it.
I like that.
Okay, so if we're going to be philosophers,
yes,
I like that.
We're practitioners here.
If we're going to be philosophers, then the mind, consciousness can do two important things. It can fundamentally expand or contract.
Yep.
You can, even with your vision, you can go diffused or foveal, peripheral, or you could go focal. You can zoom in, foveal. You can go in on something.
Does it have to be moving? Could it be stagnant?
You can absolutely hold. You've done this.
Sure.
People have done this in concentrative meditation. They put a dot on the wall or something, and they focus just on that dot, and they disappear everything else. Yeah. But they also have mindfulness meditation, where you sit back and let thoughts move by like clouds in the sky. Peripheral.
No.
Foveal. So we've got these things that our hardware can do. We can do flexible, or we can do rigid.
That's interesting. So you don't see much things as literature, like space and time and speed.
Time doesn't exist. Time is built on space.
Yes.
Time is built on space. Just like energy doesn't exist. Energy is built on matter. Okay, so we rate these two systems based on each other. Time, we can measure time because of change.
Okay.
So if I look at a tree, I'm watching something in space, and I'm watching the leaf crumble and then fall off. Via my ability to register that in space, I can judge time. So as the leaf falls, there's a certain amount of time in which that thing moves through space. So as it moves through space, I now have time. Otherwise, how do we rate time? We did it with a sun dial.
Yeah.
We watched something move through space. And we went, time. Yeah. So time exists as a demarcation of change. Okay, energy, can't prove energy exists or not exists. We base it built on matter.
Yes.
Our value.
Matter. Okay, this we can touch. This is tangible to us. Energy is an abstract concept built off of the matter we've built through experience. And from there, we can extrapolate it out that energy exists.
But space is also energy.
Now we're getting deep. Now we're getting into quantum consciousness.
So because
now we're getting into some really deep stuff.
All right, so
we could go here if you want.
I'm getting into grace, right? Because my definition of grace is that this matter could have easily been nothing. It could have been empty space. Yet the fact that I can recognize that I'm something and that I can feel anything, that's graceful.
Interesting. I wouldn't see. And for me, I go, how do you know you exist?
Sure. Well, the fact that I can even ask myself that question.
No, how do you know that you're not a figment of my dream I'm having right now?
That's true. Because we're...
Or shit, am I not yours?
Y'all are all in mine.
You're mine.
Y'all are in mine.
If you wake up, I could cease to exist.
That's true.
Now we're getting into stuff like philosophy. Now we're talking Descartes. We're getting into serious Wittgenstein and Schrödinger. We're getting into serious conversations about thought or consciousness.
Sure. Like deja vu.
And that's fine.
I don't know if you exist.
You only exist because I tell you that you exist. You only present as Balder because you told me that.
And because you chose
to believe,
and I
it.
chose to believe that.
that.
So I believe that, which means anyone could be anything. You choose to present yourself any way possible.
Well, there's always multiple realities.
There's multiple realities. Yes.
And once again, I could say, how do you know that?
Because I believe that.
There it is.
I believe
it
that.
comes down to the way you associate to,
Because it's a possibility,
or dissociate
and that's
from.
all. That's all we need.
Well, that's
is a
what science
possibility.
is. That's what anything is. It's a possible. It's hope. All you're looking for is hope. Tell me there's a chance. Tell me there's a possibility. I don't want to hear the word no, because everyone that was told no before wound up being proved right. I did it. I created this when you said we couldn't.
But there
do
have
it.
also been a lot of people who have said, prove this right, that didn't.
Yeah.
We call them crackpots or mad scientists, madmen. Okay? But so you're going to get both sides of that. You're going to get the people that end up successfully proving that the innovation that they had, their creativity, and
But they weren't crazy after all.
They weren't crazy after all.
But you can create your own diameters. I mean, that's what it goes back to. If I believe that I'm right, I'm going to prove that I'm right. If I believe you're wrong, I'm going to prove you're wrong. It's the same conversation.
Cognitive bias.
It is. It's cognitive bias. We're all biased at one point because we have our own universe.
But this is what
projecting.
I'm trying to say. We can't. We exist in a three-dimensional reality. So we have to go back and forth between abstract and concrete. Between tangible, physical, I can measure it in my five senses, and the meaning I make of it. Or information to interpretation.
God damn, it's the Matrix.
It's the Matrix.
Information to interpretation. And so when you recognize this as a hypnotist, when you recognize this in what I do, you realize that certain people are rigidly holding on to certain ideas and too flexible or too abstract with others.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, I'm a shit lover, I go, are you sure? And they go, yes. They're now rigidly attached to that belief. So it's my job as a hypnotist, as a therapist, as a conscious seeker, as a psychosocial coach, okay, to get in there and invite them to loosen that up. To loosen up that belief, that rigidity around it, that concreteness.
And so you get into neurolinguistic programming?
That's exactly why I got into
neuroplasticity,
NLP.
baby.
Okay? That's exactly why I got into NLP, is because NLP gave me a foundational map or a framework for utilizing language to help facilitate the movement from rigidity to flexibility and back again.
It makes sense. That's all.
Because if I were to tell you, that you are a multifaceted being that's capable of doing anything you want in this life.
I believe that.
You believe that. That's rigid. However, there are certain people that don't believe that.
Yep. I get that. Yeah.
There are also people that show up to my office, that show up to sit down with me and go, I don't know where I'm going with my life. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I go, well, what do you want? And they go, I don't know. That's too much flexibility. They need some rigidity. They need some concreteness. Right now, there are too many choices. They're stuck in infinite possibility. Okay, if you've ever dated or hung out with anybody who's indecisive, you'll know how challenging that could be. Where do you want to eat tonight? I don't know.
You make
but you know what's funny about that? I'm going to say, like in the clinical world, you call it like attention deficit disorder, right? What in the frequency world, you say you're in theta mode.
Oh yeah, if you're in that brainwave frequency,
right? And so we have a brain scan machine that basically measures your theta to beta ratio, which is interesting. Because if a person has ADD, technically they're in high theta, low beta.
Huh.
Which is interesting because if you think about alpha and beta waves, we're in alpha right now, right? And so if we want to change the conversations, we have to change the frequency at which our brains are firing. And if someone has a dysfunction, you could literally just change the frequency of their brain, and then they start firing differently. Theoretically.
And this is where I love what you guys do, because it's a combination of the physical body. Okay, right? Because you're measuring brainwaves, so you're measuring the physical body and its connection to the mental, which, by the way, can't not exist without the emotional. So there's a play there.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I love that you guys are coming at it from the physical body, whereas I come at it from the mental and emotional.
Well, humans have been wanting answers forever. Explain to me what it is that think about it. If you were to say this, the deepest question possible, like, what's the meaning of life?
Whatever we make it. We are the meaning makers.
Yeah.
There is no meaning to any of this without somebody who can make meaning out of it.
So what about purpose? What about purpose? Like having a purpose? I've never connected with that.
You mean a choice?
Like, what's your purpose?
It's your choice.
Sure. Yeah. But I guess my question is more of like, what is...
My purpose is to have no purpose.
The importance of Like, why is that a common question? Like, what's your purpose in life?
Common question is common question from one person to another. Okay,
Yeah,
so
like,
the reason. Okay, so are we talking about dating?
No, not
Because
necessarily.
I would talk about dating and what's your purpose, because I'm trying to figure out who they are so that I can match myself to them so that I can date them.
I just meant the last time was more of like someone asked me, what do you believe is your purpose in life? And I was like, I don't.
They're looking for your North Star.
Like,
they're looking for a core assumption. They're looking for a core belief.
Judgment.
They're looking for a core judgment in order to extrapolate the rest of your personality based off of that.
They're scanning you.
Well, so my response to that was like, I don't really have ever thought about like if I have a specific purpose other than like specific situations require specific purposes, like you mentioned earlier.
Intentionality again.
Correct.
Yep. Absolutely.
But I was like, I don't know what you mean. The best I could come up with is like, I'm just here to serve, and
which, by the way, could be too vague.
Correct. But because it's
too flexible. When you're trying to create a business, okay, and you want to do a specific business and you want to offer a specific thing to the world, the more specific you get, the more you're pulling linear.
So what is it? Is it in the middle then? Because just like he always says, you have to have an intent. Like you have to have an intent.
I would say you have an intent whether you're aware of it or not.
Sure.
I would say there's always an intention.
Just accept that that's
it's like standard. What is it? The failure to plan is the plan to fail.
Yeah. But I would say that we always have an intent, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. Sometimes the intent is as simple as hunger. My intention is to keep my body in homeostasis. So my intention is to eat.
Pay bills.
Paying bills. My intention is to stay safe. Okay, whether you're aware of it or not. My intention is to join the tribe that is my country. Whatever those borders are and whatever you choose to assign yourself to. Okay, so we're back in this rigid flexibility, linear, abstract. We're back into these polarities, which would make sense. We live in a three-dimensional reality. You got to be able to understand the polarity, the paradox.
Yeah,
it is.
The opposite sides.
How much does it play in the fact that we're always desiring to want more?
I wouldn't say we, because you just assigned yourself and absolutely everybody.
Yeah?
No, I would not say that it depends on more of what.
Well, we all want more of something. More sleep, more peace, more rest.
So that
I want more of the same
energy. If I have a desire to have less talking, then I have a desire for more silence.
Right.
So you could say we all are looking for more. Or you could say we're all looking for less.
Balance. It's a balance.
Yeah. You're not getting it.
No, I don't.
It. What I mean is you said we are always looking for more, and I could actually flip that whole thing on its head and said when you have more of one thing, you have less of another. So you could say we actually all want less of something.
Yeah, well, it's either way. You can look at it either way.
It all stems from
it's perspective. It's what I believe. It's because what I believe is perspective.
And we're back into three-dimensional reality again, and we're back into the...
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like...
But it's one of those things that it's like time wasting, like you meant earlier. Like it's just like those are not as important to think about.
It depends. Okay. It depends on, once again, it depends on context.
Sure.
It depends on intentionality. And it depends on your desired result, like the result, that the route in which you hope to get there. For example, having this conversation with the two of you and with all the energy of the individuals who have blessed our space that are around us, maybe adding to an aspect of my unconscious experience that I won't be aware of for the next 10 years.
Yep.
Because right now, all of us, like I said earlier on this, are absorbing 400 billion bits of information per second into our system right now. And our conscious minds can only be aware of, I think, 40 to 50 bits of information per second. That's a really big filter. It's a really big filter. Okay? That's a lot of data.
But we still process and absorb it.
It's still being processed. It's still being absorbed. It's still being integrated into our system, into our neurology. But what we do with it is how we filter it. It's the patterns by which we run them through.
Metabolism.
See, and you take it.
I'm sorry.
Your natural
that's
metaphor.
How it is.
Yeah, but that's the whole point.
But that's my language.
Is the physical body.
That's how I can communicate.
So then you detox. You detox the extra data that's not being used.
What is an individual that goes off into the mountains for a week on a retreat trying to do? They're fasting, but they're mental, emotional fasting. Yeah. They're getting away from any and all other beings.
They don't want an influx.
They want no triggers from any other beings.
Oh, I love that I can't even get service.
They go out in the middle of nowhere to commune with God, which means closer or more, to speak your language.
Yep.
More of God and less of man.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a cleanse.
It is a cleanse on the purest level. Because you know what we did when we did that? We went to Big Bend. We went to Big Bend in the desert, a place where man is not necessarily welcome.
Frontside Neil rode in the front shield.
Yeah, frontside Neil was there. But think about it. I was communicating with the desert. And if you walk around, all the green areas, there's cactus. Millions of cacti, all ready to stab you in the ass, telling you don't really belong here. And if you don't believe me, look at all the holes down the well of snakes. They're ready to grab you. And if you still don't believe me, I got the heat, because you can't escape the heat. So really, it's like, why the hell did we come out here? But you come out there because in the middle of the night,
no one else is going to be there.
It's deafening.
Yeah, the silence.
The
silence is so loud.
Yeah, but I want you to understand that. Listen to the beauty of the polarity of what you just said. The silence is deafening.
I love it. It changes you.
These kinds of conversations, when you use and in my field we call this the apposition of opposites. What is a relaxed tension? What if you are rigidly flexible? Okay, your brain, your mind starts to go, there's some polarities here worth playing with.
Yeah.
And if you can touch the edges, then what does that mean you can do?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
You can run the range.
Well, that's why I think of us. We're radio stations. That's all we are. David Hawkings used to talk about, it's basically the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Level consciousness, nirvana's up here. And I'm like, no, it's linear. Because it doesn't have to be anything. It's just, we change stations all the time.
Yep.
And someone asked me, I asked them, what is it like if you're at the Enlightenment? They said it's boring. They said it's so boring because you're
unless
lonely.
you talk to an enlightened being who's anything but bored.
But that's the problem. They said it's rare.
It's the idea that it's lonely at the top.
And I said that's going back to the hierarchy. And I'm like, I don't agree that it's that way.
I don't agree with that. At least what I'm hearing you say, I don't agree with at all.
Well, because
Literally,
look,
don't agree with any of it.
You study David Hawkins. You look at the pyramid,
Power versus force,
absolutely. And you have that picture in your head right now, and that very apex, right?
Yeah.
According to that chart, that's where we at least want to hit that a couple of times.
I suspect that he's trying to talk about alignment.
And by the way, it wasn't David Hawkins saying that it was like...
No, it wasn't Hawkins saying that. It was saying I was asking another person about consciousness.
Okay.
And I was like, well, according to Hawkins, he talks about it as hierarchy. And then once you get to the top, like that seems like the goal. So why is not everyone trying to get to the top? And that person replied, it's lonely. Because it like dwindles down in the amount of people that are holding space in that area. And
interesting.
Because she views it as not everyone has.
Who are you going to talk to once you're up there?
Well, the thing is, if you have a bunch of people walk around,
I don't think you would think
self-actualized. Do you even care?
Exactly.
Well, that's the other thing. You don't.
If you're self-actualized, what's keeping you from talking to everybody that's in a different part of the pyramid?
Well, that's the idea, is that you're going to share the same vibration. You're going to go in and talk and have it's going to go up and down.
You should be able to raise the vibration.
You're talking about dynamic.
You're talking about dynamic.
You're talking about dynamic.
Because literally,
I'm now with you.
You can't
have a little bit.
You can have anger.
Understand where you're
you
going
can have
with
anger. You can have guilt. You can have fear. Those are emotions. The idea is that you can also have bliss and joy in the same day.
Yep.
You can experience it within seconds.
And now we get into meta awareness.
Yes.
Now we're into meta consciousness, which is if you are guilty and angry,
or believe yourself
and you're happy that you're not heartless, that you can feel anger and guilt. Are anger and guilt a bad thing?
No.
Or did I just wrap it in gratitude?
Yeah. It's how you perceive it.
Yeah. So that's where I was getting to with grace. The idea that I can feel guilt and all that is like, it's cool because I could easily just not feel anything ever or not even be conscious of that.
Yeah. Well, have you heard the term spiritual bypassing?
No.
I haven't. Let's say your mom yelled at you a crap ton as a kid. Okay, you felt in your body pain, the sensation of pain.
Oh, like trauma being passed down through DNA.
Oh, that's a different conversation.
Okay. Let me go off here for a second. Okay. So let's say mom yells at me. I feel pain in my system. It's an emotional pain.
Yep.
I wanted love. I wasn't getting that in my perception. Okay. 20 years later, you say to yourself, well, my mom was doing the best she could.
Yes.
Are you honoring your pain? No. You're using your spiritual understanding, this ability to jump out or go meta, to go meta awareness, to try and let your mom off the hook in hopes of letting your pain go away. You're like, well, if I forgive my mom, then I can forgive myself, then this pain will go away. Nope. You have to meet your pain, in my experience. You have to meet your pain and honor your pain and love your pain and forgive yourself, forgive everybody involved, but don't ignore the sensation.
Yeah.
You felt pain. Plain and simple. When your mom could have been telling you she loved you, she was yelling at you. Let's not use consciousness to try and ignore a truth. It's a sucky truth, but if you ignore it, you create the shadow. And I meet a lot of spiritual beings that if I poke in the right spot, they'll melt. They're all love and joy and peace and prosperity until I go, boop. And as soon as I touch that one spot, they melt. They absolutely melt. And I go, so you are a light being, but you're ignoring your shadow completely. And in ignoring that, you are creating an inner conflict between yous. Yeah. It's still you. You can't run away from you. Yeah. And my teacher used to say, you run away from yourself far enough and fast enough, you'll run all the way around the world and right in the back of yourself. Okay? And I loved that because I saw the like a picture. Yeah. Okay, so for me, I call myself a shadow walker. Yeah. Which is because I'm willing to have really, really tough conversations about yourself. Stuff that, not just with myself. This is what I do with my clients. Yeah. I have conversations about the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. Yeah. If you got gang raped, you're not going to go talk about that with most people. Yeah. Man, I'll fuck with you. Let's talk. Yeah. Tell me about what that was like for you. I want to hear that because that, for me, is a dark conversation. Right. But from the shadow, it's being ignored. You bring light to the shadow. Yep. It's if you never look at it and you ignore it, you're not bringing light to the shadow. Your shadow just gets bigger. Yep. Because you're not bringing light to it. Yep. Makes sense. For me, I want to have that conversation, bring light to it. Don't spiritually bypass. Good afternoon. Okay, and bring these two concepts together of you are a love light being. You are a love light being, but you are also a shadow being too. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there also. And until you can bring the two of them together, do you really know yourself? Happy New Year. Oh, Happy New Year.
What do you do when you bring them together is the question from the crowd.
You have access to all of you. Yeah. Yes. It's awareness, and for me, everybody has to find a gateway to the shadow. For me, the gateway is virtue. I'm so sorry.
She said a lot of people don't need a gateway to shadows; they know their shadows.
Yeah, but how did they get to know their shadow? For me, would be a gateway to its transformation. You have to. I can't.
If their whole life is pain and struggle and survival, that's their shadow.
I would actually say that their shadow, if their whole life is pain and struggle and suffering, then their shadow would actually be the light. Ooh. Their inability to see the lighter parts of their life. Because I'll look at I've had a conversation with some pretty dangerous men who have done some bad stuff.
Like we're talking about
mob bosses, gangsters, people who are sociopathic. I've had some conversations. Okay, when I said to them, "What did you do last Tuesday?" Well, I made this deal that screwed these 1,500 people. I said, "How long did it take you to do that deal?" He goes, 10 minutes. I said, "What'd you do for the rest of the day?" And he's like, "Oh, I went down to the beach and I did this." I said, "Why aren't you paying attention to any of that?" So yeah, you did something really crappy and it was bad and we need to talk about that. And I know that you don't want to be like that anymore and we're going to work that out. But for 23 hours that day, you were fine.
You were someone else.
You could have taken those 23 hours and given to somebody, gifted somebody, spoken to somebody, offered somebody a compliment, but you focused in on that 10 minutes. There's this rigid flexibility thing again. It depends on where we place our attention. It's how we own that. Right? Like I know somebody whose self-worth, here we're back to that frickin' idea, is so poor that he only focuses on the parts of his life where he's hurt somebody. And I'm like, but you and I just spent 2 days together and I spent morning to night with you and you didn't hurt anybody. What about all that time? Are you not counting that into this equation in your head of your self-worth? And he goes, huh. And I went, yeah. If you look at the sheer number of moments you've probably hurt somebody compared to the sheer number of moments you've just been alive and fine and contributing and doing you, it grossly outweighs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because even like in business and marketing, you always focus on like the one negative review and not like the 100 positive ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Same thing. Yep. Same thing. But it comes down. It comes down to what is your connection to suffering. Because I believe it was the Buddha who say pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yes.
Okay. For me, pain is a sensation. It's a sensation in the body that lets you know you don't want to do this again.
Yeah. There's danger.
So you don't want to do it again, whatever it is. If I hurt my ankle, I can't step on my ankle like that anymore. Right?
If probably wear a brace next time.
Right? If my mom yells at me, I don't want my mom to yell at me anymore. So it's a sensation to create what we call approach or avoidance. Okay, I'm going to avoid that. Pain is telling me to avoid. Pleasure is telling me to approach. It's very simple. Okay, what I do with my judgment mechanism about that sensation is what creates suffering or.
That's all that. This shouldn't be happening right now.
Shouldn't. Deserve.
Shouldn't is about deserving. Okay, which is a concept that needs to be thrown away. Should or shouldn't doesn't change what is. You shouldn't treat me like that, but you're treating me like that. Instead of me wasting my time saying you shouldn't do that, I can ask myself the question, what would I like instead? Well, I'd like you to treat me better, but I can't control you. But I can't control my feet. Bye.
Yeah.
And then you turn around and walk away. And the person goes, wait a minute. I didn't tell you could walk away. No, you didn't. But I can. So I did.
Yeah.
And the problem becomes with it for a child who can't walk away. Because they can't fend for themselves. And that's where a lot of these programs come from. Because if a child had the choice at 2 years old that mommy's yelling at me, I'm going to choose to walk away now, I don't think we would have as much trauma from childhood. But a child can't do that. So now we're getting into the multifaceted nature of need. Which is, I don't want you yelling at me, but I need you to feed me. So we are in a dynamic push-pull now. We are in a dynamic
until
push-pull.
I learn how to feed myself.
Until I can take care of myself or somebody else comes along to take care of me. Okay, so we're into some deep stuff now. We're into some deep stuff.
That's the power. Yes.
Okay, we're into some deep stuff. Blessed be. So for me, there are a lot of people who suffer. Yeah. And they have lived a life of deep and profound hardship.
So is suffering an addiction?
I think it's just a habit. Once again, what is an addiction? An addiction is when you take an action in a context that doesn't lead to the result you want.
Yeah. So can an addiction be a good thing?
Yeah, I think as soon as it becomes a good thing, it loses the word addictive.
Sure. Well,
we call it a success habit.
Yeah.
It's a habit.
Right? We call it a success habit. We call it we call it a pattern of joy. We call it a routine, our daily routine.
Yes, daily routine. Ritual.
But once again, this is what I'm going to talk about on my talk tomorrow. When I give my talk on stage, I'm going to talk about how we can use language. Because if I were to walk up to you and say, I'm about to stick you in a room with a guy you just met, who's going to take his knife out and carve you up. He's going to pull your organs out, and you're going to bleed a lot. You're going to have a certain emotional effect.
Yeah.
But if I say, I'm about to introduce you to a doctor who's going to use a scalpel to surgically remove a cyst or a tumor, suddenly you don't have any issue. Yeah. But isn't that what I just described?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same exact experience, completely different sets of words, completely different sensory experience.
Yeah.
One of them were like, oh, thank God. And the other one were like, oh, God. No, thank you.
Yeah. I'd almost be like, where am I going to live? Because I want to know what that feels like sometimes. No, I don't.
So does this make sense?
Yeah.
So that's essentially, roundabout way, tangential way of us talking about deserving blame and worth.
Yeah. Wow. That was deep.
That was very deep. All right. Last thing. We talked a little bit about psychopaths the other day.
Psychopaths and sociopaths.
And sociopaths.
Yes, we did.
Give me a soundbite on it because, I know it's a big deal. Anytime there's a Ted Bundy movie, stuff like that. I'm digging it, right? Like there's so much charisma there, and it doesn't come from them being charismatic.
It actually does come from them being charismatic.
But
what if charisma is not a gene?
Okay.
Or a piece of DNA? What if charisma is just the ability to bend or break social rules in a way that invites people to experience a dynamic range of emotions?
I like that.
What causes somebody to be charismatic? Isn't it just that they're memorable? You remember them, and when you want to see them again, you want to spend time with them again, you want to listen to them, you want to engage with them again. That means that they've taken you through a dynamic range of emotions, and yet you have felt safe in their presence the whole time.
Yep.
Well, that safety is built on a set of parameters for each society, for each culture. So somebody who's charismatic in America may not, in fact, I'm willing to bet would not be charismatic in the Far East.
No.
They would call him over the top. Man, he's obnoxious and he's loud and he's all these other things. You know what I mean? No, it's okay. All good. Getting the IV out.
Hell yeah, dude. I bet that's the first time you got an IV during a podcast.
Grab this, got it. This is the first time I've had an IV in the middle of a podcast.
Yeah. We have that
wildly
we have
awesome
that
experience. Thank
awesome
you.
distinction, right?
So for me, charisma is as an actual skill set that one can develop. It just happens that
because you would have to develop it differently if you move somewhere else.
If I go to Japan, I'm definitely gonna wait and I'm gonna watch and I'm gonna see their culture and I'm gonna go, so what is the way they deal with emotion in this culture? What's the range of emotions they're allowed to have safely in any given context? Okay, and what are their habits, social habits, that will invite me to let them know I'm a part of their tribe? Because you need to communicate safety and comfort to be charismatic. So you need to demonstrate enough of their social norms to let them know I'm safe. I'm safe within your presence. Thank you. I'm safe within your presence, but not so much that you become normal or average.
Yes.
All good. Who cares?
Yep.
It's just blood. Okay, so a sociopath or a psychopath, in my experience, doesn't have the same rules inside of them. So when they're raised, they're off. Okay. No worries. So they're off. Okay, and this can be genetic. There have been studies I've seen of their brains just not operating the way a normal brain would operate. They don't feel the same way. They don't do guilt the same way. Well, if you don't feel any guilt or any shame, which by the way is programmed into you via your society, your sociocultural makeup, it's like, oh, I'm guilty about this in this society, but in this society, it's no guilt about it at all.
Yeah.
Well, if they don't feel guilt at all, they can alter the rules, bend the rules, break the rules at will, because there's nothing within them keeping them to it.
Yeah.
Well, if there's nothing keeping them to it,
there's no boundaries.
Then they can play. And if they can play, they can learn fast. And if they can learn fast, they go, oh, got it. In this culture, I just do this, say this, invite this thought, ask this question, and that will create them liking me. And they will just put that on like a mask. They'll go and drop the mask on.
That's crazy.
And that's why they can go from totally charismatic to killing you.
Mm-hmm.
And they will have no thought about it.
Yeah.
None.
That's nuts.
Yep.
That makes sense, though.
And it's scary. For me, it's scary. Because those people, in my eyes, have lost their humanness. Because emotion plays such a powerful and important role. But this is why we're obsessed with AI.
But then you find
this is why we're obsessed with like androids.
Did I hear you mention something? You find that characteristic in a lot of like high-powered people, CEOs, stuff like that.
I find the ability to ignore or depersonalize one's connection to another human to be valuable when you're at the top of a business. Sorry, you got shareholders, and they need you to increase their bottom line, or they take their money out, and then you've got nothing to invest in, which means the whole company goes away. But to get the shareholders their bottom line, I got to take the factory out of that little town in Michigan, which means 1,500 families are going to be out of jobs, and I got to move it to the Philippines. I got to move it to Thailand. And I got to be able to look at that deal and go,
Yeah.
and just sign off on it and go, I can't think about it. I got to go home and sleep tonight. So they have to somehow create that emotional distance from those 1,500 families. And what's going to happen there? Well, you get practice at emotional distance long enough, and it becomes rather difficult to build in the habit of closing that gap again and developing a heart-centered bond, because you've practiced emotionlessness so much that you've got to practice its opposite. Yeah. And it's been my experience that most of those people at the top don't have enough time in a day to practice the connection, because they're so often practicing the disconnect.
Yep.
So they go home to their wives, husbands, children, and they're there with their kids for an hour and a half before they got to go to sleep, wake up, go right back to work again. So you're literally spending in 24 hours a day, 1.5 hours in your heart and 22.5 hours not. What fires together wires together.
Yeah.
You've practiced emotionlessness long enough, and your brain literally just goes, oh, I guess that's not a useful skill. I'll practice some synaptic pruning.
Yeah.
And true. I'll just prune away those synapses.
Yep. If you don't use it, you lose it. Yep.
Okay. So
this has been badass, man. I'm glad we met.
John, such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Baldo, a pleasure.
How can people find you, Johnny?
They can check out one of my two companies. You can look at processyourpotential.com, or you can check out yourcharismacoach.com for the psych and soc.
Hell yeah.
Mad love. Thanks, guys.
All right, that's all for today for AnCap Radio. See you next week.